I never thought I'd see the day my family's peaceful lake cabin, our sanctuary for decades, would be reduced to a pile of rubble because of a power-hungry HOA. When I say our cabin, I mean the place where I learned to fish with my dad, where my mom used to grill on summer evenings, where my siblings and I would run barefoot down to the water and chase fireflies until dusk. It wasn't just a cabin, it was a piece of us. But to the HOA, it was nothing more than a bargaining chip. A target. A way to show the neighborhood that they were in charge. It all started with a letter. A bright red envelope slapped onto my cabin's front door, bold black letters shouting across the page. Final notice, non-payment of HOA fees, property in violation. Now, let me make one thing crystal clear: I had never missed a single payment. I had every receipt, every transaction logged, and every reminder saved in my email. But according to them, I owed 3 years' worth of unpaid dues. And if I didn't cough it up in 30 days? They threatened severe action. At first, I laughed. I thought it was some clerical mistake. Maybe a computer glitch, maybe the HOA treasurer had fat fingers and typed the wrong address. I wasn't worried. But then the phone calls started. A woman from the HOA board, let's call her Karen, because honestly, no other name fits, called me one evening with the kind of smugness that made my blood boil. "Sir," she said in that high-pitched, condescending tone, "we've been very patient, but you've ignored multiple warnings. If you don't pay the outstanding fees, the board will have no choice but to take action. And trust me, you don't want that." I tried explaining that I had proof of payment. I even offered to email her every receipt. But she cut me off. "Oh, we don't accept digital records as proof. If you can't bring physical, notarized copies within 10 days, the board will move forward." Click. No goodbye, no courtesy, just a deadline buzzing in my ear. I hung up, shaking my head. At that point, I figured, fine. I'll play their little game. I gathered my records, drove down to the HOA office the next morning, and handed them a binder thick with every single payment. But you know what they did? Karen flipped through the pages like she was skimming a cheap magazine, then snapped it shut and pushed it back across the counter. "This doesn't prove anything," she said with a smirk. "The board has already voted. You're delinquent." I remember clenching my fists so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to shout, to call her bluff, to drag her into court right then and there. But instead, I took a deep breath and walked out. Because here's the thing she didn't know: I come from a family of federal agents. My father worked for Homeland Security, my brother is with the FBI, and my cousin? U.S. Marshals. We don't scare easily, and we sure as hell don't roll over for corruption. Still, I had no idea just how far they'd go. A week later, I drove out to the lake for the weekend, planning to clear my head. But when I turned onto the dirt road that led to our cabin, I froze. The air was thick with dust. My chest tightened. And then, as the trees parted, I saw it. Or rather, I saw what used to be my cabin. The walls were gone. The roof was caved in. Broken boards and shattered glass lay scattered across the ground like bones of a fallen giant. My family's photos, furniture, everything we had ever stored inside, destroyed. And sitting there, parked smugly at the edge of the wreckage, was a shiny black SUV with the HOA logo plastered across the door. Karen was standing beside it. Arms crossed. Sunglasses perched on her nose. And the smirk on her face? I'll never forget it. "Should have paid your fees," she said. My blood went cold. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. In that moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this wasn't just a fight about money. This was war. And Karen had no idea who she had just picked a fight with. I stood frozen in front of the rubble, my fists shaking at my sides. The cabin was more than just wood and nails, it was our history. The smell of cedar still lingered in the air, mixed with the bitter stench of diesel from the demolition equipment. My chest burned as memories flooded back: the first time I'd brought my high school sweetheart here, the bonfires we lit after fishing trips, the way my mother used to hum while sweeping the porch. And now it was all gone. Because of the HOA. Karen took a step closer, her heels crunching over shattered glass. She adjusted her sunglasses and said it again, louder this time, like she was proud of herself. "Should have paid your fees." I turned to face her, the words boiling up before I could stop them. "I did pay. Every damn penny. You destroyed my family's property for nothing." She smirked. "Our records say otherwise. And once a property is deemed delinquent, we reserve the right to enforce corrective action." "Corrective action?" I barked out a laugh, though my voice was shaking. "You demolished a cabin my family owned for 40 years. You call that corrective?" Karen didn't even flinch. She tilted her head, studying me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Look, rules are rules. You broke them, you pay the price. Maybe next time you'll think twice before ignoring HOA policy." My blood boiled. I wanted to lunge at her, to shake that smug look off her face. But instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "This is destruction of private property," I said, my voice low and steady. "You just committed a crime, and I've got you on video admitting it." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt flash in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You think anyone's going to take your side over the HOA? We run this neighborhood. The sheriff's department, the city council, they're all on our side. So go ahead. Call whoever you want. It won't matter." And with that, she turned, climbed into her SUV, and drove off, leaving me standing in the dust. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in what was left of the cabin, staring at the broken beams under the pale glow of the moon. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors, some horrified, some sympathetic, and a few whispering that this wasn't the first time the HOA had gone too far. By morning, I'd had enough. I drove straight to my father's house. He opened the door, and before I could even speak, he frowned at the look on my face. "What happened?" "They tore it down," I said hoarsely. "The HOA demolished the cabin." For a moment, my dad didn't react. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing like steel. Then he stepped aside and motioned me in. Inside, I found my brother already at the table, sipping coffee in his FBI jacket. He raised an eyebrow. "You look like hell." I told them everything, about the fake late fees, about Karen, about the demolition. As the words spilled out, I saw their expressions harden. "They think they can get away with this," my brother muttered, setting his mug down with a thud. "They've got no idea who they're dealing with." My dad leaned forward, folding his hands. "Listen. They're counting on intimidation. They think you'll roll over, pay their bogus fines, and move on. But if their actions crossed into destruction of property, that's a felony. They just opened a door they can't close." I felt a spark of hope, but it was buried under a mountain of rage. "So what do we do?" My dad's lips curled into a thin smile. "First, we gather everything. Photos, videos, records, witnesses." Then, he glanced at my brother. "We make some calls." My brother nodded. "FBI won't touch an HOA dispute, but fraud and property destruction? Different story. Especially if they've done this before." I exhaled for the first time in hours. Finally, I wasn't fighting alone. Over the next few days, we built our case. I took dozens of photos of the wreckage. My brother pulled the HOA's financial filings. My cousin, the U.S. Marshal, quietly asked around the county courthouse. And sure enough, what we uncovered was worse than I'd ever imagined. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were running a racket. Inflated fees, fraudulent fines, even foreclosing on properties they had no right to touch. And Karen? She wasn't just a board member. She was the president. The one pulling the strings. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became, my cabin wasn't the first. It was just the most outrageous. And now, it was time to fight back. But Karen wasn't going to sit quietly. She doubled down. 2 days later, I found another notice taped to my truck windshield. All remaining structures must be removed within 72 hours or further action will be taken. Further action. As if tearing down my cabin wasn't enough. My brother crumpled the notice in his fist. She's digging her own grave. I stared out at the lake, the anger in my chest solidifying into something sharper. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every neighbor who'd been bullied, every family who'd been forced out, every person who'd stayed silent out of fear. Karen thought she could break me. But she'd just awakened a fight she couldn't win. Because this time, it wasn't just me against the HOA. It was my entire family. And we weren't backing down. The day of the HOA's emergency board meeting felt like a storm waiting to break. They thought they had called it to discuss my delinquency and address disruptive behavior. In reality, my family and I had turned it into something much bigger, an ambush of truth. By the time I walked into that stuffy conference room, my dad was already there, his Homeland Security badge clipped neatly to his belt. My brother sat beside him in his FBI windbreaker, calm as ever, flipping through a folder thick with documents. My cousin, the U.S. Marshal, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, radiating quiet authority. And then there was Karen. She strutted in like she owned the place, heels clicking on the tile, her smile stretched wide enough to split her face. Her little posse of board members trailed behind her, whispering like vultures circling a carcass. Well, Karen purred, taking her seat at the head of the table. Looks like everyone decided to show up after all. Let's make this quick. Mr. Lake Cabin, she said, spitting my name out like poison, you've had ample opportunity to pay what you owe. Since you've refused, the board is moving forward with foreclosure proceedings. She slid a stack of papers across the table. Sign these, and we can make this easier on everyone. I didn't touch them. Instead, I pulled out my phone and set it face up on the table, already recording. Then I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Funny thing about foreclosure, Karen, I said. It requires proof of debt. Which, as it turns out, I gestured to my brother, who opened his folder and spread out page after page of payment receipts, bank statements, and notarized documents. You don't have. Karen's smile twitched. Before she could respond, my cousin stepped forward, his U.S. Marshal badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. And that's not all. We've been reviewing the HOA's financials. Inflated fines, falsified liens, illegal demolitions. You've been running this place like your own personal empire. The room went silent. Karen's face paled, but she recovered quickly, flipping her hair with a forced laugh. Please. Do you think anyone's going to believe this little circus? I am the HOA. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. That's when my dad leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut steel. Without you, this neighborhood might finally breathe. You crossed a line when you destroyed that cabin. That was federal property destruction. And with all this evidence? You're finished. Karen's composure cracked. Her eyes darted from one badge to another, her hands gripping the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Why you can't do this? You can't just. Oh, but we can, my brother interrupted smoothly. See, Karen, you made a mistake. You thought you were above the law. You thought intimidation and paperwork would scare people into silence. But you forgot one thing. He slid the final document across the table, a signed warrant. You picked the wrong family to mess with. The board meeting dissolved into chaos. Half the board members jumped up, swearing they had no idea what Karen had been doing. Others tried to slip out quietly, avoiding eye contact. But it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming, the warrant was real, and the sheriff's deputies who'd been waiting outside stormed in to put Karen in cuffs. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tension in my chest loosen. Justice was finally being served. Karen screamed as they dragged her out, her voice echoing through the hall. You'll regret this. You all will. I built this neighborhood. But nobody moved to help her. Nobody defended her. The queen of the HOA was nothing more than a criminal now, exposed for all to see. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The HOA board was disbanded under federal investigation. A new community association was formed this time, with transparency and fair leadership. Neighbors who had once lived in fear began to smile again, waving at each other without worrying about rule violations. As for me, I rebuilt the cabin. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it mattered. Every plank of wood, every nail, every shingle was a declaration: you can knock me down, but I'll always rise again. The first night we spent in the new cabin, sitting around a fire with my family, the lake reflected the flames like it was alive. My dad clapped me on the back, my brother raised a toast, and for the first time in months, I felt peace. Karen thought she could break me. Instead, she exposed herself. And in the end, the cabin stood again. Stronger than before. Justice wasn't just about me, it was about every family who'd been bullied. Karen got what she deserved, the HOA was dismantled, and our neighborhood was finally free. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Maybe a neighbor like Karen who thought they ruled the block? Share your story in the comments, I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this tale of justice, make sure to subscribe for more HOA horror stories. Because trust me, there are plenty more battles to fight.